Well, with today's advanced image capture and analysis tools, it's possible to record and analyze high-definition videos from endoscopic procedures. It's useful for provider training, patient education, quality improvement, and of course, there's interest among pharmaceutical companies who are seeking to characterize patients for clinical trials. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Matt Schwartz. He is CEO and co-founder of Virgo Surgical. Their mission is to improve patient outcomes and clinical workflows in endoscopy with automation and AI tools. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
I have to learn how to pronounce vertigo. Maybe that's what my head was spinning as I was looking at all of your accomplishments. That's what I'm going to put it down to.
Yeah, no worries. So, we get questions about the company name all the time. There's a story there if you want to learn.
Yeah, good. Well, maybe we'll get to that, but not before we talk about penile implants. So the first thing I want to ask you about is kind of your background and upbringing. What was your childhood like? Any influences that have stuck with you throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in the Midwest, born in Chicago, spent about a year in Louisville, and then grew up most of my life in a suburb of Indianapolis. So definitely Midwesterner at heart. Now transplant to California. I guess it's probably appropriate to call me a California native at this point. Major influences. My dad is an orthopedic surgeon, and that had a huge impact on my life growing up and my career trajectory. I've got fond memories of riding around with him to the hospital as he's going to make rounds on the weekends. He also is a surgeon. I remember vividly as he'd be preparing for really big surgeries, he'd have a video of the type of surgery on VHS and would be watching that in the living room, and we'd kind of all be sitting there watching some gory surgery take place, which definitely is foreshadowing for my career. But he's super passionate about healthcare and his patients. He did a lot of work with pediatric patients, and I'm biased here, but his bedside manner is second to none, and really just a profound influence on my life. He's also very into Apple products, and so I remember from a young age we had a Macintosh 2 in the house, and it seemed like every new Apple product we were acquiring. And one of the ones that was most impactful, we got one of the first iMacs, and I became very interested in video recording, making home movies with my friends, just kind of funny home videos. And I was the video editor as the guy with the iMac at home. And so learned a lot about working with esoteric video formats and doing video editing. And that has carried through over the course of my career.
Sounds good. Well, when did you first encounter DICOM?
Yeah, DICOM wasn't until later, until I was actually in industry, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I don't know how many weird formats there were out there. Well, I was a little bit older, so we had I had a 8mm camera, and actually we didn't even have the Super 8, so we did like the little videos, and they weren't even videos, movies. You had to like physically splice them together, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so then for education, what did you study in college?
Yeah, so went to Vanderbilt in Nashville for college. Actually went intending to study econ and physics as kind of a bit of a physics nerd in high school, but actually got an internship the summer after my freshman year with a medical device company out in San Diego. It's where I ended up working after college, a company called NuVasive, and just fell in love with medical devices and medical technology. So went back my sophomore year and actually transferred into the engineering school and studied biomedical engineering. The dean of the engineering school told me I was crazy. They were mostly used to seeing people transfer out of the engineering school after their first year, but I was just in love with it, and had some catching up to do on some of the prerequisite courses from freshman year, but was definitely the right decision. Had a blast studying biomedical engineering there.
That sounds good. Well, I saw you had a senior project that I think was patented. What was that all about?
Yeah. Good story here. I mean, I was always, I think, a bit entrepreneurial at heart, and had my sights set on starting a company at some point down the road. And so when it came time for senior design projects, most of my classmates, their senior design projects were basically research projects where some professor in the engineering school had a research project in mind, and their senior design project was sort of just to execute on it. But a good friend of mine, who's also a biomedical engineer, also entrepreneurial spirit, we really felt like we wanted to build something that was our own and do something creative and something that could actually potentially be a product. And I don't exactly remember how the concept came up. Maybe a couple beers were involved, or we were studying late nights. But the idea was to build an implantable drug delivery device to treat erectile dysfunction, which definitely led to some jokes and some good times. But is actually, I think a viable product need, and was a super interesting senior design project. The engineering challenges at hand are complicated and fun to solve. And I actually still think that it would be a viable product alternative to solutions that are on the market, whether it's pharmaceuticals, injectables. There actually are implantables that are pretty archaic. And so, we had a really good time, the two of us, working on that over the course of our senior year. And then when we graduated, we actually spoke to the university about transferring the technology out and getting the rights to it. They were fully on board. And so, basically spent the year after graduating while I was working on nights and weekends, would actually work on getting it patented. And we now own a patent for it, which was a really cool experience.
Cool. When I first started in consulting, I remember one of the clients, I wasn't working on it, but was a penile implant manufacturer. And you can imagine in consulting, there's all sorts of jokes about, up and coming industry and that kind of thing. So it is a medical need, though, as you said. So you were at NuVasive, which it sounds like you learned about and met while you were still in school. What was your progression like there?
Yeah, so I got an internship at NuVasive the summer after my freshman year on the marketing team, and just was kind of getting broad exposure to the company itself and what medical device companies were all about. NuVasive had an incredible company culture, very fast moving, very innovative at the time. They were a leader in minimally invasive spinal surgery, specifically with a product line called XLIF. And over my summers interning there, I became more interested in the product management function there. Their product managers were really leaders within the organization and helped drive everything from early product ideation through product development, working closely with physicians, all the way through product launch. And so that's what I set my sights on becoming out of school, and was fortunate enough to get a job there as an associate product manager after I graduated, and spent about 5 years there working on their flagship product lines, a procedure line called XLIF, which is this lateral approach to spinal fusion surgery. I was able to launch a number of instrument systems, implantation systems, ultimately helped grow the product line to over $125 million in annual sales, and had just a phenomenal experience there. I'd say I learned most of what I know about product from NuVasive.
Now, do I remember correctly that I think San Diego is like the world capital of spinal surgery? Is that still accurate? That's sticking in my head somewhere. I think it's because the spinal surgeons like to live out there.
It's definitely a nice place to live. I will say there's now almost like a little, I'm sure you've heard of the PayPal mafia. There's a bit of a spine device mafia out here in San Diego now. A couple of the people that started NuVasive, they came from spending time at Medtronic and Smith and Nephew. It's definitely a small industry. Everyone knows everyone. And now from NuVasive, there have been a number of other spine companies that are now up and coming here in San Diego. There's another company called C-Spine. There's one called Alpha Tech. So yeah, it's definitely built up a little community here, specifically around spine surgery. And there's so much just like, I guess, institutional knowledge in spine surgery that now lives here in San Diego, which is kind of interesting.
Now, after there, I think you were at Intuitive Surgical, which I believe is home of the Da Vinci robot. Is that right?
Yep, you've got that right. Intuitive is the maker of the Da Vinci robotic surgery system, which is just amazing technology. Felt very fortunate to get recruited up to Intuitive. Was there, I think I joined there, it was kind of mid 2015. and was product manager on the platform systems. I was working mostly on their most recent system, the Da Vinci Xi, and working on some of the future facing systems. And honestly, just opened my eyes to what the cream of the crop when it comes to surgical technology looks like, and really got me thinking about the future of surgery and medical procedures in general. I was really lucky to get to support and observe surgeries around the world with both NuVasive and Intuitive. And when I was at Intuitive in particular, I think it's about the most advanced surgical technology that exists. You've got doctors operating using robotic controls. They're basically in a VR control station. And even still, these minimally invasive surgical procedures can be quite morbid. And as I was thinking, what is healthcare going to look like 20, 30 years from now at the end of my career? It sort of started to dawn on me that if we're still doing morbid surgeries 20 to 30 years from now, even if it's the most advanced robotic technology available, I think it will have felt like a bit of a failure to not be able to reduce morbidity and get away from surgery. And so that's what got me thinking about other opportunities in healthcare, and definitely led me down the road of what eventually became Virgo.
So it sounds like you're definitely very well primed from your childhood, both with your dad and your computer experience, which you did in school, NuVasive, Intuitive. So it's a logical next step, to found Virgo Surgical. So how did that actually come about, though? Because that's a big deal between saying you want to be an entrepreneur, but going from a job. Like what actually led to starting the company? Is it like a particular problem you were trying to solve? Was it just time to go? You got kicked out?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that all kind of came together. And honestly, I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel like this. It was just the culmination of almost my entire life coming together in one moment to make it impossible to avoid taking the leap. And so I carried it through my career. I would do a bunch of video capture when I'd go out and support surgery. I would try to get good video content, and then I'd actually edit it and turn it into marketing materials and training materials. And it was always incredibly impactful when you could capture a high quality video of some new surgical technique. It was like outsized impact. And that definitely was in the back of my mind. The other thing I saw is, as I was going around supporting robotic surgery with Da Vinci, it's a $2 million surgical system. It's putting out 3D HD video. And almost nobody around the world, you could go to some of the top medical centers in the country, in the world, nobody knew how to record video from it. If you wanted to record video, you'd have to set up these esoteric video recorder systems. And I knew how to do that, but nobody at the hospitals knew how to do that. And so I had that floating in my head too, that there's this video data being generated that nobody was capturing. And this was probably mid 2016. I started to get really interested in machine learning and computer vision. I had kind of nights and weekends taken some computer programming courses and was starting to learn Python, and then became obsessed with machine learning and computer vision in particular. Was taking machine learning courses online. And I think like most people in healthcare, especially around that time when they started to become exposed to machine learning and the advances being made in convolutional neural networks, if you have a healthcare background, your first thought goes to radiology, and you just say, "Oh, this would be great for building AI systems for X-rays and CT scans and MRIs." And so that was the first thing that crossed my mind. And then saw that there were 1,000,001 people already working on the problem. But the second thought was, well, the big thing you need to train and build robust machine learning systems with deep neural networks is data. And there was this fantastic data source in procedural video being generated but not captured. And I started just piecing those elements together and thought there are certainly so many ways to improve medical procedures with AI, but in order to do it, you need the data first. And I always knew I wanted to start a company and just could not get this idea out of my head. I was like working on it nonstop, nights and weekends. I'd be going to conferences for Intuitive and daydreaming about Virgo. And eventually, it was October 2016. I just took the plunge. I had to go in and quit my job and started working on it, and was living in San Francisco at the time. And had just moved in with my girlfriend, now wife, and had a very expensive rent obligation. So it was a bit of a crazy move. My
Yeah.
parents thought I was crazy, but it's the entrepreneurial bug that you just can't kick.
Good. All right. Well, congratulations on getting married along the way and not,
Yeah, thank you.
not being personally bankrupt. So, you mentioned, procedures, but you were talking before about robotic surgery, but now you focuses on endoscopy.
Yeah.
So why endoscopy? What are some of the characteristics of that? First of all, what is it? I'm not sure everybody knows. So.
Yeah, great question. So we take, I think, the broadest definitional view of endoscopy, where it's essentially any video-based medical procedure. So doctor for endoscopy generally means they're placing a small video camera inside the patient to visualize anatomy, and they could be doing that for a number of reasons. They might be doing it to make a diagnosis. They might be doing it to apply a therapeutic. And then there's actually a whole world of performing surgery endoscopically. And so, technically, if you look at robotic surgery, it is endoscopic surgery. So that it's generally classified as robotically assisted laparoscopy, where laparoscopy is endoscopy of the abdominal cavity. And so there's all sorts of different types of endoscopies. When people hear the word, if they have an association, it's generally with GI endoscopy, which could be either an upper endoscopy of the esophagus and the stomach, or a colonoscopy. But there's all sorts of endoscopic procedures, bronchoscopy, cystoscopy, and then all the different types of surgery, laparoscopy, robotic surgery, arthroscopy. The scopy part at the end of those words is usually the giveaway. And frankly, when starting Virgo, I had this broad idea that we wanted to improve patient outcomes and clinical workflows in healthcare with AI for video-based medical procedures. And so naturally, I started talking to all of the surgeons that I'd worked with over the years that did video-based procedures. And it was actually pretty serendipitous that we stumbled upon GI, had no experience in the space, but through a couple of friends and family connections, my co-founder's father actually was seeing a gastroenterologist in UMass. And then, as it turns out, an elementary school friend's father was a gastroenterologist. I got him on the phone for a call, and he informed me that turns out one of the world-leading experts in performing screening colonoscopy to prevent colorectal cancer is Hoosier native and is at Indiana University. His endo center is actually right down the street from where I grew up. So started talking to him. And what we ultimately learned is that in GI endoscopy, one, it's by far the highest volume endoscopic specialty. There's something like 25 million GI endoscopies done every year in the US alone. But it's also primarily diagnostic in nature as opposed to treatment oriented like surgical specialties. And so for those reasons, we felt like it was a great jumping off point for what we were looking to do with Virgo, the high level of data being generated. And then we also found that there was this latent demand from a community of GI physicians who really wanted a better video capture and documentation system that was just not being provided to them by the incumbent players. So it was a confluence of factors that brought us together into the GI space.
No, it sounds extremely interesting. And I think because of all of your background, you knew how to take advantage of that once you kind of put all those pieces together. So there's a lot of times that, physicians say this would be cool if you could do this, that, or the other. But it's not always lined up with something that is actually economically viable. Because although people listen to physicians to a certain extent, from a financial standpoint, that it's not usually the case unless there's some specific reimbursement or something associated with it. So how do you translate this would be really useful and good into something that actually makes sense from a business standpoint?
Yeah. Personally, I think that's the hardest part of starting a company in healthcare in particular. The financial incentives in the U.S. healthcare system are extremely convoluted and oftentimes counterintuitive and even counter to what's probably best for patient care, which is certainly unfortunate, but it is the harsh reality that you have to deal with as an entrepreneur. And so, we had I think, good knowledge of that going into it. Just, my background coming from the medical device space, my co-founder and now our chief revenue officer, Ian, is a good friend from undergrad. He started his career at Epic doing EHR implementation work, and then was a healthcare IT consultant with Deloitte, and then a smaller boutique consultancy. And so we had, I think, some baseline knowledge of how to navigate those various incentives and understand what is nice to have versus what's a need to have, and what a physician priorities do or don't line up with whoever is controlling the budget at the end of the day. But it takes a ton of exploration. Even still, your best intentions often don't line up with reality when you hit the ground. And for us, we definitely focused initially on trying to unearth some physician pain points. We found that, especially in academic GI practices, there were core groups of physicians who really, really wanted video data capture for quality improvement initiatives, for training opportunities, and then to support their own research. And fortunately for us, the product we were building was very well aligned. Now, there's no direct reimbursement for what we do around video capture, but those academic physicians oftentimes would have research budget or training budget that they could assign to the product that helped us get up and running. But long term, we always knew that the real value was in the data network that we were building, and the long term opportunities to leverage that data to build and launch new products down the road.
Where does the pharmaceutical industry come in? I mean, I had alluded in the beginning to clinical trial recruitment, which is more than just a matter of, hey, there's somebody in the endoscopy suite, maybe they could be in a trial. How does the sort of video and data and AI relate to what pharma might be interested in?
Yeah, this was something totally new for us, and that we learned along the way. In our travels, we bumped into a number of gastroenterologists who were principal investigators for big GI pharmaceutical trials. And most of the trials are in inflammatory bowel disease. There are other GI diseases that are pretty active when it comes to pharma development. But we would hear over and over again that the endoscopy data capture piece of GI pharma trials was really lacking from a technology perspective. And this cropped up in a couple of different ways. And as we started to explore with pharmaceutical executives, we heard repeatedly that it was really, really hard for them to find and enroll patients for IBD clinical trials in particular. And IBD drugs they can be blockbuster drugs for pharma companies. Look at drugs like Humira, Remicade, and Entyvio. These are multi-billion-dollar annual drugs, but the pharma companies have a really hard time completing clinical trials and getting new similar drugs to market. And as you dig into the specifics of IBD, and I think other diseases that have heavy presence of endoscopy in the treatment paradigm, what you find is that the endoscopy video from a patient's colonoscopy has a very large impact on whether a patient can or cannot be a participant in specific clinical trials. So actually, like the disease activity as viewed on colonoscopy is one of the primary outcome measures. And if you look at like typical electronic health records, they just didn't include that video data. And so it's really hard to find the right patients in a health system who could be eligible for a trial. And then even if you had a patient in mind, you'd have to bring them in oftentimes for a repeat colonoscopy just to get them evaluated for a clinical trial. And they may not be able to participate after that colonoscopy. And so what we started to realize is that this data network that we built up was perfectly suited for IBD clinical trials, and I think other types of GI trials will follow because we see this data in real time, and then we've built up artificial intelligence that analyzes procedure videos and essentially throws a flag when there's a patient candidate that we think is worth taking a second look at, and we can immediately route that to the right clinical research coordinator or principal investigator on the trial.
We talk in general about the challenges of recruiting patients for clinical trials, and let's leave aside just the sort of selection criteria, and if you can find people that fit the specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. But just what you said before about, let's say, if you've got a patient with IBD, which means they're pretty sick with Crohn's or colitis, ulcerative colitis, and then you say, well, based on what we saw the first time, they might be a candidate. Let's put them through another, endoscopic procedure. There's a lot of preparation just for anybody who's, completely healthy. And if you actually have IBD, the preparation can be a real challenge and actually even a threat to your health if you're doing it too often. So plus there's always some risk of doing that. So if you can actually go from a value proposition to going to not needing to do a repeat just to see if somebody's eligible, I mean, that has to be very big right by itself there.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, the clinical trial recruitment problem is not unique to IBD. There are elements of IBD that make it specifically challenging, but it is this multifactorial problem. It's not just the data, it's also the patient experience. And as you said, patients that have been living with IBD for years are looking for ways to get better. They're not looking to undergo unnecessary medical procedures only to potentially be eligible for a trial. So that's a huge value proposition, and a big part of what we're trying to do and continue to focus on is new ways that we can just improve the overall paradigm of research experience in IBD trials. We also have found in the standard of care use cases for Virgo that some doctors actually share procedure videos in Virgo with their patients. Not every patient is interested, but those that are really love seeing their procedure videos and having access to that data. And so one of the other things we're exploring is actually making the endoscopy videos available to trial patients to help keep them engaged in clinical trials over time. So it's not just come in for the first treatment. You need to come back for your additional exams throughout the course of the research. And we think sharing that data to trial patients is just ethically the right thing to do, but also a great way to keep them engaged in the trial.
So Matt, you talked about data and AI as it relates to an endoscopy, and there's obviously a tremendous amount of data because it's also time series. Like if you're looking at compared to like a CT scan or something like that, you're having this over a course of a potentially lengthy procedure. What kind of data are we talking about? So if you talk about you analyze the data, are there established biomarkers that you can just say, hey, here's the scale and now we can just rate it automatically? Or when you have this huge richness of data that wasn't there before, do you have to create, new scales, validate new measures in order to get the most out of all of what you're capturing and analyzing?
Yeah, there's definite excitement around both. So if you look at ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease as great examples, both of them have these endoscopic scoring criteria. So for ulcerative colitis, there's the Mayo score, the Mayo endoscopic subscore. For Crohn's disease, there's a score called the simple endoscopic score for Crohn's disease. It's got simple, but it's actually a bit cumbersome to complete. There's absolutely excitement around using AI to automate those scoring systems. And not just automate, but to actually make them more objective. If you look, there can sometimes not be great inter-observer agreement when it comes to the Mayo score or simple endoscopic score. And so there's a lot of active research right now. One of the things we're working on is ways to automate those scoring systems. But I think there's actually much more potential to build computer vision, AI-focused scoring systems and novel biomarkers that are much more granular in nature. If you look at the Mayo score, for example, the endoscopic subscore, patients get a score of either Mayo score 0, 1, 2, or 3, where 3 is the worst and 0 is essentially remission. And if you actually take a look at these endoscopy videos, you realize, that's a pretty rough score for a patient. It's not a lot of granular detail. And so there's a ton of interest right now from academics as well as from pharma companies in building new scoring systems that can identify subsets of patients and then use those types of AI biomarkers to design new treatment protocols for patients as well. And for us, where we think Virgo fits in is primarily around the data capture. We've established this massive data repository that continues to grow. By the end of this year, we'll be capturing well over 1 million endoscopic procedure videos on an annual basis. And that data becomes really useful to build up these types of unique scoring systems.
So, Matt, I know it's Virgo 24/7 for you, but have you had a chance to read any good books lately? Anything that you would recommend to our listeners, or anything you'd say, it's not worth the time? please avoid?
Yeah, I guess a couple things. We've got a 2-year-old at home, and so a few of the books that we've been reading have been, raising children related. There's a great one called Bringing Up Bay that my wife and I really enjoyed. And then kind of fun stuff that I enjoy. There's a book called Conscious by an author named Annika Harris that it's a short book, I don't know, maybe like 100, 150 pages, and is a really nice just whirlwind tour of the latest science as it relates to consciousness, and also a pretty interesting exploration into the area of consciousness called panpsychism. And I definitely got a kick out of that. I like to nerd out on all things machine learning. And as you go down that road, you start thinking about the human brain and what consciousness means. And so would recommend that book to anyone. It's a quick and fun read.
Oh, that sounds good. Well, Matt Schwartz, CEO and co-founder of Virgo Surgical, thank you for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Yeah, thanks, David. It was fun. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.